Welcome, everybody, to the very first episode of a new podcast called Leaders on the Record. I'm Tarai Trott with the Department of Communications. This podcast is all about giving Bermuda's leaders the space to go deeper than the usual government press conferences and sound bites. Today, I am excited to have the Honorable Michael Weeks, the Minister of National Security, who is here to have a chat about the violence issue in Bermuda, particularly gang violence, which is an issue that has gripped Bermuda for some time. Minister, welcome.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, Tarai.
You recently held a series of town hall meetings on violence alongside the police commissioner and the governor. And those events, the last one was in November. Can you tell us what was the objective of these meetings and what was the most important things that you heard from residents?
Well, simply put, the objective of the town hall meetings, Tarai, was to listen to the public, not to lecture them. To go into these town hall meetings to give the public the understanding that we want to listen, we want to engage, we want to hear what the public had to say, what their advice was, and how we can go from there collectively as a community.
What are the next steps? People are asking. You indicated that suggestions will be taken into consideration.
Well, actually, we are going through the footage, and we are looking at a lot of the concerns that were raised, the advice that was done. So everything is being tabulated now. And once it is tabulated, where we see fit, we will incorporate them into the overall strategy, the violence reduction strategy. So we want the public to understand that these meetings were not just a tick box exercise. It was to actually get input from the community, and we will use what we can to incorporate into the strategy.
During those meetings, there were concerns about supporting youth mentorship and prevention. People had pointed out to the root cause of violence, such as education, health, and the family breakdown. I know your ministry has invested more than $500,000 in community organizations as part of your strategy against violence. I want to get you now to talk about these programs concerning the root cause. For example, community clubs was one of the priorities.
Mm-hmm. Well, Tarai, I'd like to start off by saying that what we cannot do is arrest our way out of trauma. So the object of these, having the $500,000 from government so that we could invest in the community and sporting clubs is exactly that. Because if we don't do what we can preventative to get our young people steered away from violence and other forms of crime, then the streets will get them. So what we are trying to do with investing in community clubs is to make sure that the community club is an option before the street takes hold of them.
And talking about the street taking hold of people, Minister, it seems that the demographics are getting younger in terms of the young people who are getting involved in gangs. I mean, I've seen reports suggesting that young people in primary school are being groomed. What's going on here?
Well, from my observation, Tarai, is that the early exposure of our young children to adult conflicts is a part of what is happening. And in saying that, what I mean is that now when our children are allowed to witness violence and the like on their videos, on their iPads and the like, our children are being exposed to violent events earlier. So rather than us focusing on the 18-year-olds, we have to now focus on the 13-year-olds and younger, because our aim is to recognize that our children are maturing quicker. When I say maturing quicker, they are being exposed to violence earlier at a younger age. So we have to recognize that we have to be more preventative. So to get involved in them when they're in elementary and middle school.
And talking about that exposure that you mentioned, how much do we blame the media, particularly social media?
I don't want to use the word blame, but it's just reality. Now we are living in a time when social media is at our fingertips. And one of the downsides of that being at our fingertips, our children are exposed to it at an earlier age. So hence, we have to, as parents, we have to have parents monitor what your children is watching, monitor what your children is using, and don't just leave your child to freely surf the media or surf the web.
I remember watching a video of you speaking in Somerset, I believe in May alongside the Deputy Premier Zane De Silva at a candlelit vigil against violence. This was in the aftermath of that tragic shooting that took the lives of two people, Jasmine Smith and Shaquan Williams, which left a third person injured. And you said very bluntly to the crowd and to those in attendance that people of Bermuda must stand up, speak out, and call it out as it is, and that this was the only way for this issue to be tackled. What did you mean by that, that it is ultimately up to the people to do something?
Well, Tarai, I simply meant, and I still mean it, that government cannot fix what the community continues to protect. And I'm saying that if the community doesn't call out violence and violent tendencies as they see it, we're not going to be able to police our way out of what we are finding ourselves in. And I strongly believe that police cars is not what brings safety to a community. Our neighborhoods and our communities are safe when the people in those communities and neighborhoods say that they will not accept what is happening. So we have to stand up, we have to speak up. Now the police are there to help to manage, to help to protect, but ultimately safety is really in the hands of the community.
What do you say, to play devil's advocate, what do you say to those who will be listening, who will say, well, it's not really my job to do anything about violence, it's the police's job, and what are the police there for?
Well,
it seems to get lost.
Well,
sometimes.
actually, I try to stress that this is a multi-pronged approach in keeping our community safe. The police do have a job to do. Their job is to help to enforce. The government has a job to do because they have to give the community and the police the resources necessary in order to fight crime. But the community also has a job to do. So they have to stand up, they have to speak up, right? Because if we think that more police or more police cars is what it's going to take to keep our community safe, we will always be chasing our tail. We have to say that each of us have a job to do in keeping our community safe.
You previously used the example of what happened in the U.S. in the case of Charlie Kirk, who was a popular right-wing figure who was tragically gunned down. And you said in that case, it was the parent of the alleged shooter who was instrumental in authorities making an arrest.
Well, actually, I used that example, that tragic example about the young man, the activist Charlie Kirk, when he was killed. When the suspect was noticed by his father on TV, he didn't say, "Not my child." When he was certain that was his son, he told his son, "If you don't turn yourself in, I will." This is not a lack of love, but this is actually a protection of his child, but also an understanding that the community safety is important. So parents, by protecting their children when they are doing wrong, is not actually helping them or helping the community.
Right. I think you've touched on it already, but going back to that vigil in Somerset that I was talking about, you also noted at that time that these men and women who are behind this violence that we're seeing, that they are not somebody else's children. And I think you've already addressed that. But just to clarify, whose children are they?
Well, they are children, right? When you look at a child's trajectory, our teachers taught them, our coaches have trained them. They went to our churches. They have been fed in our neighbors' houses. So if we disconnect from them emotionally, what is it that we expect when they disconnect from us? We have to recognize that these are our children that we are talking about, and we have to come up with a collective solution to help to steer that percentage of our children who are doing untoward behavior back on the right path.
Do you believe that the parents providing shelter to their children, to give you the context of this question, another statement that you made during that vigil was that it is up to parents to play their role. You even stated that not even your own children would find safe shelter in your own home if, in theory, you ever suspected that they were involved in such activities. So that leads me to ask, do you believe that parents providing such shelter to their children in their household, knowing that their children may be involved in acts of violence, is this a significant problem in Bermuda?
I think it is, Tarai, and the reason I say it's a problem is that the parents may not necessarily be protecting their children out of malice. It could be out of love and or fear, But if we don't call it as we see it until that happens on our doorstep, then the problem is if we shelter our children's bad behavior, if we don't acknowledge weapons that may be stored in the house or whatnot, then we become part of the problem. So we too become guilty if we don't call it as we see it.
You've said repeatedly that people, if they see something, say something. What do you say to those who may hear your challenge to speak up and take a stand against violence, but who feel too afraid to speak out, to turn in their own child, for example, or make a call to somebody about any suspicions they may have?
But I'll tell you what, I remember hearing a quote a while back, that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being able to do what you got to do in spite of fear. So if, like, for example, if I give you an example, if your child is in the middle of the road and it's about to get knocked on, that parent that rushes to that child's aid isn't fear, but they summon courage in order to save that child. And that's the kind of perception that we must use for our communities. Everybody's fearful at one point or another, but we must be courageous enough to do what we must to save our communities and do our part to save our communities.
I want to go back to a question that speaks to the heart of the gang violence issue. What do you believe is fueling this tit-for-tat violence that we've been seeing? All sorts of theories have been presented.
When I think about it, Tarai, I think it's unresolved retaliation. I do something to you, so you got to get back to me, or you get to one of my family members. If somebody gets shot, then somebody has to answer. Once that happens, more and more families are grieving. What we are trying to do in the violence reduction strategy is to teach conflict resolution. Because when young men lack conflict resolution tools, then revenge becomes their language.
To what extent do you believe the drugs trade in Bermuda may be fueling?
Well, yeah, the drug trade is a part of it. But when you're on that street and you're a part of a gang, because most people, one of our desires, or everybody's desire, is to be accepted. And out on the street, the gang offers a way to be accepted. But with that comes danger, it comes debt, and sometimes it even ends in death. So looking at a person's need to be accepted, this is where our community clubs comes involved. Let's create environments inside our community clubs before they get out on that street corner. Let's create environments inside our churches. Let's become mentors, because that way we could give those young men and women who are leaning toward untoward behavior the option of mentorship and community involvement.
I was at your town hall meeting in Southampton, in which you were with the governor and the police commissioner on November 17th. A lady in the audience took the mic and suggested that certain inmates, particularly those convicted of gang-related crimes, should be made to serve their sentences overseas. Now, I realize that corrections falls under a different minister, the Attorney General, but as speaking to the overall security issue that this individual raised at the town hall, firstly, let me play what she said.
My point is that on the slide, there was quite a bit of information about the police units and the information and what they bring together. There's a lot of information within the prison system, within the gangs, which is why I take to David's point about, I don't know if you can actually do that, the legalities of moving them to another country, but a lot of this gang-related communications happen still while they're in prison.
You just heard that, Minister. Do you have any reaction to what she said, to the point about moving people overseas? Because it's come up before.
Well, Tara, I could speak generally about that. When we incarcerate young men, we hope to rehabilitate them. So if we send them overseas and they come back to Bermuda angry, as angry men, rather than rehabilitated men, then we are allowing them to affect the community twice. Because remember, there's our young men. So we have to make sure that the tools that we have up in Westgate are the tools that could satisfactorily help to rehabilitate those that have been incarcerated.
And as government has said, and other ministers have said before, Westgate is indeed a correctional facility. It is not meant to be a prison.
Exactly.
About the GVRT, Minister, the gang violence reduction team that resides within your ministry. This has come up over and over in recent reports, the role of the GVRT and what they do to help to reduce violence and they are under the leadership of Pastor Leroy Bean, who is the gang violence reduction coordinator. I know that you have stated that reaching young people in schools, especially young black men, is a key task when it comes to diverting young men from the gang lifestyle. I know GVRT is active in the schools for this very purpose. Can you shed some light on the things that they actually do
Well, what I can say about the GVRT in the schools that they are very much involved in conflict mediation. They have mentoring groups. They help to have our young men and women reintegrate back into mainstream academics. So a lot of what they do is not public-facing consumption, but it's definitely what they do. They are front and center on our front line, helping our young men and women to reintegrate back in mainstream education.
In response to people who question the effectiveness of the GVRT, I've heard you state publicly that most of the work, as you just alluded to, is deliberately carried out quietly due to a number of legitimate reasons, especially the work done by Pastor or Bishop Leroy Bean. You know, without giving away too much detail, I know you can only say certain things. Can you give us an idea of a typical week in the life of the GVRT?
Yeah, because again, I say the GVRT is on the front line. So they're always mediating between rival gangs. Obviously, we can't make that public. You know, they help to support grieving families who have lost a loved one. So the GVRT's role is to stay connected to those families and help them to navigate their loss. And what's also important, the GVRT does a lot of work to prevent retaliation, because a lot of stuff that we experience is tit for tat. So the gang violence reduction team's role is to get right in the midst of that and try to come up with conflict resolution.
You and your team have been working hard over the past, at least the past year or two, developing a national strategy on violence reduction, which is aimed at tackling the root cause of violence in an unprecedented way. First time it's been done. If I'm listening to this episode and I'm hearing about the strategy for the first time, what should I take away concerning the purpose of the strategy?
Well, the first thing that you could take away, Tarai, is that we are finished, but through reacting to gunshots. Our job, our strategy is pre-violence, prevention, intervention, and reintegration. So the takeaway should be that the violence reduction strategy is heavily focused on prevention. And that means getting into our high schools, our middle schools, and our elementary schools, helping community and sporting clubs to come up with children's programs and mentoring where we need to. So the violence reduction strategy is less on enforcement and more on prevention.
Another question, Minister. A lot of effort and time and discussion has gone into this issue of violence over the years, not just from you, but, successive governments. Are we at the point where we need outside help, such as from the UK?
We collaborate when needed. If we need to reach out to the UK, we do. Our Caribbean partners, we do. U.S. Prevention techniques we use. But I must stress that we must craft Bermuda's grown solution, our homegrown solution, because these are our children, these gang members, these young men and women that participate in violence are not imported, they're ours. So we have to come up with a Bermuda solution to this problem that we've got.
It's an interesting point, Minister, because I remember at the last town hall you held in Southampton, the police commissioner who was on the panel with you at that town hall, he pointed out to statistics showing that unlike in other jurisdictions where a lot of or a portion of the shooting incidents were done by people not from that city or country, in Bermuda, the people who are suspected of committing the shootings, for example, are all Bermudians.
All Bermudians, victims and perpetrators are all Bermudians. So this is not a conversation that we could have about people coming into our country. This is a Bermuda issue, and we can say, not my son, not my relative. We have to look at this here as a collective, because this violence is not imported. This is homegrown.
And talking about that same town hall in Southampton, Minister, I recall hearing another remark from an audience member who implored the island not to overly rely upon the government to fight the violence that we've seen, and for the public to take matters into their own hands to do things such as establish their own mentorship program or community club, which is very interesting because so far the narrative has been, what is the government doing? What is the police doing? Do you support this way of thinking?
That the community should be involved? Absolutely.
Well, that they should come up with their own programs.
Yeah, and the reason I agree with it is because government cannot be the sole parent. We can't be the only coach, the therapist, and the spiritual guide. If anyone wants to come up with a plan to be a mentor or a homework program or even walking young man to school, whatever you want to do to make your contribution, I would say please do. And where government can assist, we are more than willing to assist.
Lastly, Minister, personal question. How have you been coping? You are the head of a very busy, very important ministry that deals with violence and headlines such as tragedies and things like that. We just saw in November, it was Men's Mental Health Month. And how do you cope with all of this?
Well, I try to cope by taking some time for me. I try to meditate. I walk. I don't go to the gym as much, but I try to do those things that can help me to address what I have to do on a daily basis. And there are people that stop me on the street, call me, that want to pray for me and encourage me and whatnot. All that helps me to cope. Like I said earlier about everybody wants to be accepted. It's nice when somebody pats you on your back and tell you, something, man, you're doing a pretty good job. Or let me pray for you, man. Or come walk with me. Or join my gym. Or I do that stuff one day at a time, and a lot of it is the support of our country.
Thank you, Minister, for your time. Unless you wish to add anything else, I'm going to leave it at that.
What I can add is that when we deal with what is happening in our country, we have to recognize that, and I've said it over and over, that the police cannot do it alone, government cannot do it alone, and we recognize that the community can't do it alone. But collectively, if we all do our part, find what it is that we can do that can have a positive impact, and we'll get on top of this scourge.
Well said. Thank you, Minister. You've been listening to the Minister of National Security, Michael Weeks, in the first episode of Leaders on the Record. I'm Tarai Trott. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.
Bermuda Live on YouTube. Subscribe now.